Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics who write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs, and currently I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today's guest is John Munsell, author of the book INGRAIN AI: Strategy Through Execution, the Blueprint to Scale an AI-First Culture. John, this couldn't be more timely, and I really enjoyed your book.
Oh, thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. Good to be on.
Well, I thank you for coming on, especially on a Sunday morning. I know your travel schedule is busy, so I'm glad to have you. Let's start with part one, the AI implementation crisis. Why do you believe most organizations fail at AI implementation despite knowing its importance?
Well, there are a couple of that's a big question, right? Because I think a lot of them fail because they don't know enough. I think that's the big thing. So like we get called by CEOs who say, look, I don't really understand this AI thing. And I know there are a lot of people in our organization who are using it and I hear a lot about it, but I can't lead if I don't know. So the other thing is the people who are using it are pretty much self-taught, right? Because this thing by most people's barometer is only about 4 years old. Everybody else has been working with machine learning for decades, but it was only available to the public in November of 22. And so there's not a whole lot of room for expertise for the people who have day jobs to try to learn. It's the people like me who this is their whole job, who spend 16-hour days working on it. So the cloud comes in the fact that you got a whole lot of people who have learned it different ways. They're all self-taught. They don't have a common language, so to speak, to relate to one another on what this AI thing is and how it operates and how it works. So I think that's kind of the biggest issue that we see is they're now trying to herd the cats because no one has good processes and no one has a shareable process that can be scaled throughout the organization. And the leadership team doesn't know enough. And so they're afraid to make a decision. So we have to start with education.
So let's back up to how did you get to this point that you wrote this book? And so give us a little bit about your backstory and why you wrote this book.
Sure. So I'll go back pretty far and then I'll accelerate. so
Uh-huh.
uh, I started off in financial services and I spent 16 years in financial services. And then in 97, I saw the web coming out and I decided, oh, this is where the new frontier is. And I've always, been a bit of a propeller head. I was building software applications that I could use to make my job easier using Excel and things like that. So I left financial services and started a software development company to build web applications because there weren't any, right? And we gradually grew into a web design agency and a mobile application development agency, and then a digital marketing agency. And then as my kids started to graduate from college, my wife and I were looking at each other and said, they're all over the country now. It'd be cool if we were a little bit more mobile. So I sold off the agency side of the business and went from a high of 40 employees down to a low of 2.5 with the idea that I could be mobile. And I spent a year working with CEOs of different companies, thinking that I would be a fractional CMO, fractional chief marketing officer.
Yeah, sure.
And then I realized that was the same job that I just got rid of, and I didn't really want that job. But because I had to use AI to essentially replace all these employees, that was what I was doing all day long. And I realized that after working with these CEOs, every Friday we'd have this thing called the CXO Roundtable. I realized they were way more interested in how I was using AI than how I was talking about marketing. So I started to teach them how I was using AI. And then I decided to build a course around it because they kept encouraging me to do that. And it was in that course that I realized that people weren't really understanding this methodology of prompting that I had developed that we call scalable prompt engineering. It's just it's just a way to structure prompts so that anybody else can come behind you and see exactly how it flows, see exactly what works, and then have the appropriate context to get the most out of AI. And so I developed this framework called the AI strategy canvas. And when I showed that to our first cohort, then all the lights kind of went on. Everybody was like, "Oh, I get it now." And that's when I realized I was really onto something. And then, about 3 months later, the provost of LSU called me up. He heard what I was doing, and so he came over to Lafayette to see what I was doing. And then he immediately asked me to teach the honors students. Well, I didn't want to be a professor, so I said, "Well, how about if we just go and go through continuing education and we go directly to businesses and help them learn how to use these things?" So we built a program to do that. And then a year into that, after having a lot of success, a couple of people kept pushing me to write a book. And so that's when I wrote the book. It took me about 7 months to write the book, and I released it at the end of March last year, 2025. And then it's been kind of going crazy ever since.
Well, congratulations on that. Let me pause this for a second.
All right.
What's the biggest misconception leaders have about getting started with AI?
I think the biggest misconception is they probably just think it's easy. You ask a question, it gives you a response. What's not to love about that? And so I think they miss the power behind it when they don't dig deep enough. So since the book was written, we've developed what we call the 10 levels of AI mastery. And most organizations, their entire population, if you will, is hovering around level 2. And there are 8 more levels to go. And I think that's kind of the big misconception, is that it's easy and you can just let people loose with it, and they think they're going to get instant capabilities that way. And so by letting somebody teach themselves, we've found that it takes somewhere between 19 and 24 months to get somebody to level 6 or 7, which is where you really start to see the value, because people are building their own tools. 19 to 24 months in AI years is a long time. That's way too long. And we can get them there in 2 months with training. And so the big misconception is, let's just let people figure it out on their own, and they don't train, and they don't realize that they're leaving almost 2 years on the table in terms of what they could be producing right now. So I think that's probably the biggest misconception. The second one, I guess, what I would say is that they feel like building one AI tool, like maybe a customer-facing chat bot, or a tool that analyzes your payables and looks for ways to streamline cash flow. Those giant applications they sound sexy because they solve one giant problem, but you get far more impact by training all of the people in your organization. If you have 50 employees or 5,000 employees, if they all learn how to use AI with their own fingertips at their own desktop, the impact to the company is significantly greater as a cumulative than it is by building one simple vertical application.
Do you need to learn to be a programmer, or do you need to be just trained to ask the right questions?
You really just need to think of AI as an assistant, and you wouldn't just ask questions of the assistant. You would give the assistant context, and you would give the assistant information, and you would give the assistant your standard operating procedures, so that he or she would know what to do. That the big problem that people have is they just see, Claude or ChatGPT or Perplexity or Gemini, any of them. They just see it as another search engine, and it's not. It's way more than that. So I think the big key is, it's not just asking questions. it's giving it context and giving it a task and a goal. And that's a whole lot different than just asking it a question. Does that make sense, Mark?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's what we try to teach them, university students, is you have to have the background information to get the right information.
Right.
And so I said that's why teachers are never going to disappear because we're needed to get them ready to be able to use it. How how scary does is the future of the workforce for people coming out of college when Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and all the others are basically saying half or more of the jobs are going to disappear because AI can go and replace people doing it. When we have a company that started by two of our students, has about 50,000 clients now, called MyPal, and they're telling people you're not going to lose your job. We're just going to allow you to spend more time on what's important, and it will do the administrative task for you. So these redundant tasks or whatever you're doing that eat up a lot of your time, we'll be able to free up more of your time to focus on more important things. What's your take on all this?
Well, I think everybody's got a theory, right? And like Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. The
Yeah,
the the thing with AI is will it replace jobs? Yeah, because I mean AI gives you excess capacity, and if you can't sell into the excess capacity, what do? You don't need people for capacity that you can't sell into. So it will replace jobs, but then the question is, what are the new jobs that would be created? That's one of the theories. And now they're starting to realize they can't really think of a whole lot of jobs that would be created that couldn't be also replaced by AI. The question is how deep is the trough and how wide is it going to be? And what I mean by that is how big is that job loss going to be and how long is it going to last before we start to figure out how do we deal with all this? The way I look at it is I think the impact will be significant, but I also think that we have more time than people think. There are a whole lot of people think by the end of the year everybody's going to be toast because of the way AI agents are taking off. Okay. The problem with agents is security. The and to me, I think that's what's going to slow this whole thing down because AI technology is progressing far faster than security can catch up. And so when you look at a company who says, well, we're just going to get a whole lot of AI agents to, let's take the banking industry. We'll use AI agents to make lending decisions and we'll use it to analyze and we'll use it to all this stuff. Um, that's kind of tricky because an agent, if you give it autonomous rights to execute certain commands, you could literally blow up your entire company. And that's where I think the danger lies. Not only that, but the computing power that they're unleashing with AI. It used to be that certain levels of encryption they thought would take 20,000 years to break. They're now forecasting that potentially by the end of the year, it might take 20 minutes to do that. So that is
right.
pretty scary, right? So if you can't even encrypt your passwords to the bank, then somebody could easily use AI to create an agent to wipe out your bank and your bank account and transfer it into theirs. And those bad guys are already doing that kind of stuff. So that's where I think things will slow down. The other thing that I think will slow down is they're pouring billions of dollars into infrastructure, as you know. But I don't know about you, but my laptop is approaching, I don't know, 8 months old, and it replaced one that was 4 years old. I have a tendency to replace my laptops every 3 to 4 years. Those servers, we used to have massive servers and stuff. Those things we would replace every 3 years. Sometimes it was because of equipment failure, and sometimes it was because the technology outgrew, the software bloat outgrew the technology to crank. So my concern is they're putting all this money into these giant server farms to produce or to give the compute power behind AI. Those might not last 3 or 4 years. And now all of a sudden that infrastructure's got to, be replaced. So that's a big question mark. Where's the revenue come from to do that? So anyway, I know that everything's going to be different, but are you familiar with the work by a guy named Ichak Adizes, Adizes?
No.
He's got a book called Corporate Life Cycles. I believe it was written in '97, but he he shows you how corporations live and die, grow and die, and what you can do about it. And he breaks down your staff by what he calls PAEI: the producers, the administrators, the entrepreneurs, and the integrators. So the producers are the people that just do the work. The administrators are the people that like to have rules and organization and structure. The entrepreneurs are the idea guys, the ones that take the risks and come up with the new ideas. And the integrators are the ones who like to build culture and teamwork and camaraderie and get everybody working together seamlessly. And we all have a different mix of those. And so he uses like a lowercase p if your producer trait is low, an uppercase A if you're a dominant administrator, et cetera. So he has all these things. So my point is that when you think about producers and administrators, that's AI work currently, right? Entrepreneurs, which is the ideas, and the integrators, which is the teamwork and the people side of things. That isn't necessarily handled by AI unless it's driven by a human, right? AI is not going to just sit there on its own and come up with a creative idea, but a human pushing AI to interact with it can, accelerate creativity. So the way I look at it is, if I'm a highly productive person with significant administrative traits, I can now have AI do those things. So I can put structure around AI and I can have it produce. Now that's going to take that load off of me, but that allows me to now become a little more free to do other things in the entrepreneurial side and the integrative side. But if I'm not particularly wired that way, then my focus would be on making AI a 10x version of me. Does that make sense? And so what I'm trying to do is work with businesses to say, look, let's look at your team. Let's look at the chemistry of the team. Let's figure out, what is AI going to do when it starts taking on the P and the A roles, and what do we do with the rest of it, and how do we get more out of our people to become more creative? And then how do we get them, if they're not really creative, we just know that they know how to be really, really productive, but they're the ones that could make AI even more productive. So that's kind of what we work with people on, is trying to figure out what's the balance when we put AI in it, and then how do we make the entire operation much more efficient. So sometimes it's about efficiency and sometimes it's about revenue growth. But if you train your staff, all of that stuff comes naturally. If you don't, then it gets kind of rough.
In part two, the tools for transforming resistance, you emphasize culture over technology. What's the biggest cultural barrier to AI adoption?
Well, I think the biggest one is fear. Okay. Most people are afraid if they learn it too well, you're going to replace them, you know? And then on the other end, at the executive level, there's fear that if they don't know it, then they can't lead with it. So I think that's one of the big ones. The other is very simple. It's, how do you define adoption? And if you read all the research out there, and they talk about 86% or 90 some odd percentage of companies have adopted AI. when you read the fine print, the way they have adopted AI or the way they have defined that word is having a single tool that has AI somewhere in it. To me, that's not adoption. That's dipping your toe in the water, right? If I have a bunch of Microsoft 365 licenses and there's Copilot somewhere in there, that doesn't really count as adoption if nobody's using it or if everybody's using it as a glorified search engine. That's not adoption. So I think they need to redefine adoption. And at a corporate level, you have to develop your strategy and your definition of what true adoption looks like in your organization. And then you have to understand that this is not necessarily a technology adoption issue as much as it is a change management issue. And I don't mean change management by just monitoring the trade out of software licenses or technology. I'm talking about change management from a human level. We have to realize that people are stuck in their own levels of inertia, and we need to understand how to break that cycle of I've always done it this way, and we have to retrain them to think differently to let AI do that stuff and help them become better at their jobs and accentuate their capabilities. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course. Also in part two, how can leaders turn resistance into momentum instead of forcing compliance? Because people are so afraid of the fact that they could lose their job that they really hesitate to wanting to use it.
Well, I mean, everything really starts with education, and in the absence of information, people will replace it with negative thought. So if you don't teach people and you don't communicate about AI and what your plans are for it, then you'll have resistance and you'll have fear, and that's the big thing. But on the other end, if you teach people how to use it in a manner to where they can see, gee, if I got it to do this and this, that would take all of this stuff that I hate to do, and I could get my little AI robot to do it, right? And when they start to see the productivity gains that they get, that's a win personally. And people like recognition, they like significance, they like to share, they like to help. You have to kind of build that into the culture as you're adopting AI, because that's really where it starts to take off. But again, if you were telling people, okay, you can't bring this into work, and some of them are going to do it anyway, now you're setting yourself up for risk. But on the other end, if you have a program that says, we're going to take you from just using it as a search engine, and we're going to teach you how to build your own tools so that some of these tasks that drive you crazy, that take hours and hours and hours every week, we're going to get a machine to do that. And we're going to let you be the overseer of the machine. We kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but the way I phrase it is, if you don't know what excellence looks like, you'll always get mediocrity or less out of AI. Your people know your culture, know your processes, and they know what excellence looks like. They can drive that out of AI. And that's what we want to do. We want to take those people who know what excellence looks like and then transfer that knowledge into AI that allows it to do it even better and faster. And then I think you'll see, at least in our world, we see people really loving working with AI because they see how much time they get back, and it's a lot more fun that way, I guess.
No question. I think it's one of the most, maybe it's the most amazing tool of our lifetime outside of the internet itself. In part three, what is AI Strategy Canvas? What inspired the creation of AI Strategy Canvas, and why is it so powerful?
Well, the main thing was I needed people to understand what context was needed to make AI give the best possible results. And everything else that I've ever seen out there were just these what I call acronym based frameworks. They spell a word, and that leaves a lot out. Inside of any letter that spells a word, you're still have a whole bunch of other stuff you have to do. And I read a book, oh gosh, I don't know, about 2014 or so, called Business Model Generation. Are you familiar with it?
Now,
So, business model generation, um, in it, the guy developed a thing called the business model canvas, and it was a
oh
framework.
yes, of course,
Okay, so
sure.
you're familiar
We
with the
all
business
use that
model canvas.
knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Gotcha. Okay, so the business model canvas, you know what the grid looks like and you know how it's
Yeah.
set up. And so you essentially have the debits on the left and the credits on the right. And then, at the bottom, you have revenues and costs, right? So all of that structure is very familiar to somebody who's trying to figure out how does the business operate. Who are our customer segments, who are our key partnerships and relationships and all that stuff. Well, when I was trying to teach people how to pull the appropriate context to make AI really powerful, I could tell they weren't quite understanding that. And then one night it hit me that the business model canvas, re engineered to talk about how AI operates, would be the perfect way to illustrate it. And so I stayed up all night mapping out the different blocks of the business model canvas, but using it in an AI context. And then I presented it the next day to our cohort. And that's when everybody clicked. They immediately got it. So like the front right block on the business model canvas is customer segments. Well, on the AI strategy canvas, it's target audience. All right. The bottom right block on the business model canvas is revenues, but on ours, it's the request. So what we teach people to do is prepare the context first and then ask AI to do something. The left side on the business model canvas at the bottom is expenses, right? On the bottom left in ours is rules. Those are the things that govern the output. So in a business model canvas, it's expenses and revenue is going to govern the net profit. In ours, it's rules and requests that kind of govern the output. And everything up at the top is going to talk about your style, brand voice, what's the role that the AI plays, what are the resources you need to make it happen, what additional context do you need, what do you need to know about our company, what do you need to know about our products. All of that stuff is mapped out. So that's where it came from, teaching people and trying to get a point across.
So, what are the 9 building blocks critical to AI success that you mentioned in construction of AI strategy canvas?
So the first block is target audience. That's who are we talking to? Who is going to be the consumer of the output of the AI? So if I'm writing marketing stuff, it's going to be who is my target audience? What are their pains and frustrations, et cetera? On the other end, if I work for a university and I'm trying to do a grant application, my target audience is the person reading the grant application, right? If I'm writing a board report, the target audience is the board. So I need it to kind of frame up who it's talking to. The second one is going to be the company. What do I need to know about the company for this output to be successful? So if I'm building a customer service chatbot, I need to have certain information about the company. It could be as simple as name, address, phone number, and contact information. On the other end, if I'm building a legal application, I might want my tax IDs in there. I might want wiring instructions in there. I might want critical contact information in there. All right. Then you get into the third block, which is products and services. That could be a very simple list, or it could be a set of documents that describe in detail all of your products and services. So each one of these blocks can be a section of a prompt, or they could be knowledge-based documents that sit in a RAG, retrieval augmented generation database or something like that, or it could just be uploaded into the AI. All right. So those are the first three: target audience, company, and then products and services. The middle block is called context. And that's where you would inject other things like maybe your thoughts on the subject, what other guidance you might have for it. So, like if I'm just telling it to write a blog post about topic X, that's going to sound like anybody else. But if I tell it, I want you to research this, here's my thesis, here's my hypothesis, here are my thoughts. Now I want you to come back and write something. Now it's injected your thoughts into it. Then you have the role, which is what's the role that we're asking AI to play? Who did we just hire? Sometimes you use it and sometimes you don't. But if I'm trying to do a financial analysis, I might say you're the greatest financial analyst in the world. I'm being, a little flavorful here, but you can tell it exactly what role it plays, and all that's going to do is make it focus. Now, the role is becoming less important as we get into reasoning models, but we digress. All right, then the next one is style and brand voice. So that is telling the AI how to write, how to sound. And we use a calibration method for that rather than saying, I want you to use a little bit of humor and talk in a casual voice. We're going to calibrate humor and some of the other variables we have, like sentence length, et cetera. So we would say humor equals 2 out of 10, 2/10. That allows you to ratchet it up or down rather than saying just a little bit of humor where it can interpret all kind of weird stuff. The next block is resources. And that's what else does the AI need to perform its job? Do I need an API connection to our customer database? Do I need a web interface to collect data? Do I need any number of access points, right? And then at the bottom is rules. That's how do I want it to behave? Am I governed by certain regional, local, or national or international policies? What do I want it to not do? What do I want it to specifically do? Do I want it to always write a disclaimer at the end of it? Those are rules. And then the final one is the request. What is it that I want the AI to do? What's the goal of this whole task that I'm asking it to do? And that's how you think through a prompt, but that's also how you think through an initiative, right? So if I decide I want to build a customer facing chatbot, I need to know all of those blocks and I need people to come in who represent those blocks, So it could be that I need HR if we're going to build a customer facing chatbot, because some people might want to ask questions about applying for a job, et cetera, but they might know rules and stuff that I need to know. And I'll
How do
need
you
to
feel
bring
about
in, pardon me?
How do you feel about these chatbots? I mean, I find them so annoying, and I think most people do, that it frustrates you more than helps you. I mean, I've try to go along with it, ask it questions, and then it still doesn't provide me with the answers, even though it's supposed to get smarter.
Right. Well, so here's what you have. You have two kinds of chatbots. And the question is, which one do you have? Or which one are you interfacing with? You have a chatbot that's based on the old decision tree kind of logic. It has a couple of pre-programmed responses, and it's basically just looking up in a database what it could respond with depending upon what you asked. So that's not real artificial intelligence or even machine learning. That's just decision trees. Those are irritating. The ones that are bound by artificial intelligence, if it doesn't give you the right answer, doesn't give you what you want, and doesn't direct you the right way, that's because somebody didn't put the right prompts in place, didn't put the right knowledge base in place. And so that's a classic garbage in, garbage out situation. Like I had an interaction with two different chatbots last week. And one of them, it even said, I'm an artificial intelligence chatbot. I'm like, okay, cool. I might be able to get somewhere. And it was terrible. I was like, look, I need to talk to somebody in sales. and they literally had this button. Do you want to talk to somebody in sales? Boom, I click that button. So it feeds it in there and says, I want to talk to somebody in sales. And then it says, okay, go to our website and you'll find all the answers you need there. I'm like, but that's not talking to sales. And then I would, get a little frustrated with it. I'm like, but you're supposed to know this stuff. And then I even I wanted to see just how connected to AI it was. I said, somebody in your organization needs to work on your knowledge base because you should know what the email address is and what the phone number is of sales, or you should be able to branch and connect me with them. And it said, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. I'm like, okay, this is a poorly designed chatbot. And then on the other one, I had one that went really well. It was really well populated. It knew to detect frustration in my text. It knew when to escalate. It knew when to move, but it gave me the appropriate information. The other one was just a complete fail. It was stunning to me that it wouldn't even it wouldn't give me the phone number for sales or the email address for sales, but instead it told me to go to the website and look for it. That's the dumbest thing ever.
I usually call sales and then tell them my problem to get customer service because they don't do sales, so
There's
they
a workaround.
automatically have a human contact you and then have them work it through. Because I found every time I try to play along, it never works, and it becomes so frustrating that you wish that you weren't their client anymore.
Oh
And so
yeah.
many people are going to it as a cost savings, not to help the customer, but actually just to reduce their cost of doing business. And I think that's what people resent the most. In part five, AI governance, safety, security, and ethics. How do you balance innovation with governance without slowing teams down?
Well, when it depends on the size of the company, but when we're consulting with a larger company, say, 500 employees or up, we help them stand up 3 layers of governance. So if you think about it, if there are 10 levels of AI mastery, which is what we teach, the farther up that ladder you get in your capabilities of using AI, the more sophisticated the AI architecture underneath you. So, and you get up to where you're starting to connect systems, right? So you're not just using the front end chat interface, but now you need it to automate something. You need it to populate something or pull some data. All right, well, that's a more sophisticated AI architecture. So your level of mastery pushes the sophistication of your AI architecture. Well, as the AI architecture increases in complexity, then your level of governance must increase as well. So we start with an AI center of excellence, which governs people in the first 3 levels of mastery, because they're still operating inside of a chat interface without connecting systems. And at that level, what you're focusing on is the chemistry of that AI center of excellence, the people. And so in that PAEI thing that I was talking about earlier, we want a lot of entrepreneurs on that committee and a lot of a few administrators on that in that committee, because the administrators are the ones that are going to put the rules around it. But the entrepreneurs are the ones who want to keep going and they want to be creative and they want results. All right. So we want to make sure the chemistry of that team is solid. And then we want to make sure that the AI Center of Excellence establishes guidelines. And then as we move up in governance to an AI council, which is the top layer, they are the ones that establish rules. Now, rules have consequences, guidelines give people leeway. So that's kind of how we do it. We want to make sure that at the lower level, when people are learning their way up, we're giving them a sandbox to work in. We're giving them a lot of latitude and rewarding creativity. But when they start to connect to systems or maybe they have access to data that's confidential, then we're going to tighten it up a little bit. But the goal is to get people really working with it rapidly to where when they get into those complicated procedures, we have the appropriate governance that comes in and say, all right, we're going to need some approval on this thing. But the other thing is to make sure that you have a really good approval process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
When you're putting together your AI team to develop whatever app that you're going to utilize, who should be on that team?
Um, that what I would do is I would pull out the AI strategy canvas. So we have it blown up in a big 4 foot wide board by 2.5 feet, I think. And we'll have it up there and we'll be thinking, okay, what is it that we want to build? And then when we look at that board, we can determine who needs to be on that team. Do we need representation from IT? Do we need representation from HR? Do we need somebody from marketing, from finance? And when you look at the strategy canvas, you start to see, okay, in order to build it the right way so that it communicates well, so the style and the brand voice, and we know who we're talking to, we're going to need to probably bring somebody in from marketing. But then on the rules side, oh, we better bring in somebody from HR and we better bring in somebody from legal. So you start to figure out who needs to be on the team depending on what the initiative is. But I wouldn't get there's no hard and fast rule that is a one size fits all. It really depends on what you're trying to build as to who needs to be in it. But I would tell you that you need some idea people in there. You need some of those entrepreneurs or innovators on that committee, regardless. And then you need maybe one or two administrator types to put the rules in. But the focus should really be on innovation with some level of security on it for sure.
In part seven, what is AI strategy? You mentioned the small ball problem. What is it and why is it dangerous? And should companies think differently about AI strategy versus traditional strategy?
Well, yeah, I mean, AI strategy is going to be way different because the risks are significant and they're fast. Okay. So it's not one of these things where you can sit on it. The technology is moving really rapidly and the security risks are moving as rapidly. But small ball is just looking at it as one of two things. One, we're just going to build an AI application, and now we're fully on board with AI. That to me is small ball. Other small ball is let's just let people use Copilot, and I'm picking on Microsoft right now for a second. The if you have the free version of Copilot or the free version of ChatGPT or the free version of any of these tools, you're missing out on a lot of power, and you're letting your employees just use it as a glorified search engine. So those kinds of things are small ball. AI can do so much more than just answer questions. And if you don't know how to use it, AI is really nothing more than a sycophant. It'll tell you your ideas are genius, but you need to have it push back, right? You need to have it work with you as you massage new ideas. But then when you get into more sophisticated things like Claude's co-work, I don't know whether you've used it before, but that's going
Yep.
to need a layer of security in your organization because it's actually working on your local hard drive and it can connect to network drives. But what it will do in seconds is amazing. So it's a massive productivity enhancer. But those are big gains. Now, and I'll give you one more for instance, and then I'll shut up. But most of people think that if you use AI correctly, you're going to create additional bandwidth in the organization and additional efficiencies. But we trained there's a large international furniture manufacturer that we worked with, and we were training some of their top dealers. And the CEO of a dealer, and the reason I'm bringing this out is because this is a CEO, right? Most CEOs are like, oh, I don't need to learn this. I'm just going to delegate it. But this CEO went through our training and he built a tool on his own, right? Based on what we kind of taught him and the feedback we gave him, he built a tool that would analyze RFP requests, inbound RFP requests. Now, these inbound RFP requests are 350 plus pages long. And so they could be about lighting, they could be about plumbing, they could be about furnishings, and so what they have to do is they have to go through that and figure out what in that RFP would apply to them. And he said that process would take anywhere from 3 to 9 hours just going through that RFP to decide whether or not they even wanted to respond. 3 to 9 hours. Then, if they decide it's worth it to respond, it would take 3 people about 2 weeks to assemble everything to make that response and send it in. Now, think about how much time that is. Now, in our training, we have what we call a capstone project. So everybody has to build a tool that saves at least 3 hours. And so that was what this CEO was doing. He was trying to build his tool. He built a tool that would analyze that inbound RFP, and he could get to a go or no go decision in 20 minutes as opposed to 3 to 9 hours. And he could get a full response with all the right furniture, the serial numbers or whatever VIN numbers I don't know they have in that business. I don't know. But he would have a fully completed response to the RFP within 2 hours, not 2 weeks with 3 people. And so what he said to me was, he said, this is millions of dollars to us, because instead of us responding to maybe 2 to 3 RFPs per year, which is their previous track record, they're able to respond to 3 to 5 a month. And he said, this is literally going to be millions of dollars to us. So that's taking a course thinking that he was just going to learn how to ask questions and get better responses, to in what took him 4 weeks to go through the training, to building a tool that will generate millions of dollars to the organization. But that's a different kind of thinking, but he never would have done it had he not gone through the course and learned what was possible.
We have about 5 minutes left, and so I'm going to try to whiz through some more of the questions for you. In part 11, the problem with traditional prompting. Why does traditional prompting fail at scale inside organization? And what does prompting excellence actually look like in practice?
Well, I think traditional prompting, if we were kind of define it, it's what we would call paragraph prompting or word vomit prompting. It works up into an extent in these lower levels, but when you need a more sophisticated output, you need structure around it. And then it really depends on whether or not you're doing it over and over again. If you're doing it over and over again, then we really need to have some structure around it. And that means having containers of information. So a container might be your target audience, or a container might be your style or brand voice or whatever. But somebody else can come in, see your containers and see how your request operates and say, oh, gee, if I swap out this container for that container, I can get it to produce something completely different over here. So you have to grow into that level of sophistication, and you have to know when to use it. But then you have to know, when do I use that to produce an artifact that would be a knowledge-based document? And how do I, keep from asking AI the same questions over and over again? How do I assemble knowledge that I can feed AI and it has it always present? All right. So that by traditional prompting, if you're just asking questions and getting responses back and forth, you're missing out on the real power, especially when you get into things like Claude skills, where you have a very structured markdown file that Claude can call on basically on inference of a prompt. And that's where things really change for people.
But which AI do you use the most, or do you use a couple of them? Do you use Chat, Claude? What are you typically using, and what do you
I
recommend?
Yeah, that's a good question. I use all of them. It would be, well, I say all of them. Let's just say I use the top five. So I use ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, Gemini, and Grok. Those are going to be my primary ones, and I use them for different reasons. It's the way I look at it is each tool has its advantages and its disadvantages. So they're like a group of employees. You know who to go to for one thing, and you know who to go to for something else. The other thing is every now and then one of them will glitch, right? You can always tell a glitch. Well, with ChatGPT, for instance, you can always tell when they're in the process of releasing something new because stuff gets really glitchy. You can do the same thing with Claude. You're like, oh, they must be getting ready to release something, or they're in the process of it because it's timing out. I think lately, I used to use ChatGPT as my primary thing for certain things, and then I would move to Claude for anything that had to do with writing. Now lately, I've that relationship has flip flopped. I use Claude probably 80% of the day. And then I'll use ChatGPT for other things. It just depends on what I'm trying to do. I'm going to go to Gemini to create videos and images, and I'll use Grok if I want up to the minute information. If I'm looking for feedback, if I'm looking for a sentiment, I'm going to go to Grok for that. If I'm going to build a spreadsheet, I'm or a slide deck, I'm going to go to Claude. If I'm going to be working on my desktop and comparing documents, definitely going to use Claude Cowork. And I think if I'm doing analysis or I'm trying to build a white paper, I will probably go to a mix of GenSpark and Perplexity. GenSpark is another one that I didn't mention, but GenSpark's pretty powerful. And then I use ChatGPT to do some analytic work. Their reasoning model is really, really good, as is Opus 4.6 on Claude. So those are my favorite tools. But I can't say if I had to pick one, what would I pick? That's kind of a toss up between Claude and ChatGPT, I would say, just because of all the other things that you can do besides, stay in a chat window.
So, in part 19, preparing for the future of AI, how do you see the shift from prompts to AI agents evolving, and what should organizations do today to stay future ready?
Well, interestingly enough, I just wrote a white paper on that very thing, and that's what my new book is going to be about. But I think AI agents are here. Okay, it's not a coming soon. They're here, and they're already posing significant risks to organizations as well as significant gains. But you can't go from using AI as a search engine to building AI agents. That's like taking a 3-year-old and putting them behind the wheel of a Ferrari. You don't make that leap. You have to make incremental steps to where you're ready for that. You have to learn the different levels of mastery. So working with agents is typically going to be around level 7, 8, and 9. And you have to learn the foundational information and training, if you will, before you get there. So I think that's the key, is to make sure that the people in your organization who will be building these tools and maintaining these tools have the foundational expertise to do that. If you don't, that's a tricky part. So it's also a matter of governance. So you need to have governance in place as well. And when we're helping somebody set up their governance, after we've established the governance structure and the rules and all that stuff. We actually put them through a simulation, which would be an AI breach or an AI gone rogue simulation. And we do that through our partner called IR Game. And it's a fascinating thing, though. So you'll have 6 people in your organization participating in this game, and they see what happens, and it's about a 90-minute game, and you're seeing what happens almost in real time and how you're going to respond to it and what you're going to do. And so now all of a sudden you see the risks, but you also see how do we need to adjust governance and prepare for this actually happening rather than respond to it after the fact.
So here's the last question. What does a truly AI first organization look like 5 years from now, if you could even project out to 5 years from now?
Man, I yeah, 5 years from now with AI, that's a hard one. I think if you go 2 years from now, that'd probably be easier. It's just changing too fast to figure out what happens in 5. But I think an AI first organization is one where the employees are all thinking about AI as their main tool, and they're thinking of it in terms of how do I perform better and how do I drive this tool to provide more value and to give me more peace of mind. But I want people to think of themselves in charge of AI rather than being subservient to AI. And so to me, an AI first business is one where the employees are thinking about how do we leverage AI first. And that goes across the board. It's not somebody who's still stuck in the we're going to always do it this way because we've always done it that way. And it's somebody who can think beyond just asking questions. They see how to build the scaffolding and the tools to perform better.
John, I'm sure, even though it's Sunday, I'm sure people would love to go in a couple more hours here. And I apologize for the people who, for some reason, did not get the Zoom link. Oh, we do have a question here, and I don't want to walk away without it. Was AI, a question from the audience, was AI reducing human brain thinking ability?
Was it or is it?
Is it?
Yeah. Um, so here's what I would say. Um, it's it certainly has that capacity if you let it, and that's one of the things that we're starting to incorporate into our training to move beyond just how do you use it, but how do you continue to improve your own reasoning skills and your own ability to discern, because there's a real danger with AI presenting information in such a convincing manner that you yield to it. So we have to. It's like any other muscle. You have to continue to use it, or else it will atrophy. So I don't really. Um, I think there is a big risk to that, but I think the more we train people to think as opposed to yield, I think the better we'll be. But I know that they've done some studies, and it does in fact reduce your thinking ability. So I know that's a fact, and that's why it's a risk that we need to incorporate into training.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big concerns we have at universities is that people are not are relying too much on AI. I tell my students, if your boss is asking you a question, you've got to go to AI. He doesn't need you. He or she doesn't need you. They just hire less expensive people to go
Yeah.
look into that part of AI as well.
Mhm.
So. I thank you for taking the time to speak with us, and I hope that we'll be talking to you again when your next book comes out.
There you go. No,
Yeah,
I
and
appreciate
I'm
you
sure
having
in
me
the
on,
world it
Mark.
will change tremendously.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. No, but I appreciate you having me on, Mark. It's been a blast.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. Everyone, thank you for joining us again. My apologies for those of you who didn't get the link, but everybody will get the interview and they can watch it at their leisure. Thank you, everyone. Take care.